The black iron gates loomed ahead, standing tall and unwelcoming. Emma Carter hesitated, gripping the handle of her modest suitcase, more out of habit than necessity. She had been here before, many times, walking through these very gates, past the rows of pristine hedges, stepping onto the polished marble floors of the Harrington estate. But today was different. Today, she was just another guest, barely acknowledged, easily dismissed. The air smelled of damp earth and roses, a fresh scent that clashed with the weight of grief in the atmosphere. She stepped forward, past rows of luxury cars lining the driveway, each one gleaming under the dull gray sky. The house towered before her, a grand structure with century-old pillars and stained glass windows, silent witnesses to decades of family drama. Inside, hushed murmurs filled the halls, punctuated by the occasional clink of glassware. The Harrington family had never been good at mourning. They treated funerals the way they treated board meetings, formal, strategic, cold. Emma adjusted the dark coat around her shoulders, scanning the room. Rachel Harrington stood near the fireplace, gripping a crystal tumbler, eyes red-rimmed but sharp. Henry Harrington whispered something to Gerald Whitman, the family lawyer, who nodded solemnly while slipping a folded document into his briefcase. Daniel Harrington, the grandson Emma had practically raised, sat rigid in a leather chair, avoiding her gaze. Nobody approached her. Nobody acknowledged her presence. Emma swallowed the knot forming in her throat. She had spent years in this house, caring for Daniel, listening to Margaret Harrington's stories, pouring cups of tea for late-night discussions about legacy and fairness. She had been promised security, spoken to like family until today. She overheard fragments of conversations as she moved through the space, the wills being read later, ... Henry's furious claims he should have gotten more. Wait, didn't Margaret always say she'd leave something too? The words stopped when Emma came too close. Lips pressed together, eyes shifted away. She wasn't part of this world anymore. A chill ran down her spine. The tension in the room wasn't just about mourning. It was about power, money, and something no one wanted her to see. Emma squared her shoulders. If she was being pushed out, she wanted to know why. The scent of polished oak and aged parchment filled the study. Emma lingered in the hallway just outside, her fingers grazing the ornate woodwork of the doorframe as muffled voices carried through the crack in the door. Inside, Gerald Whitman, the family lawyer, spoke in measured tones. The will reading is scheduled for this evening. Only immediate family will be present. Immediate family. The words settled like a stone in Emma's stomach. She wasn't supposed to eavesdrop, but as the murmurs inside grew sharper, she couldn't help herself. Henry Harrington scoffed. Mother was sentimental. She probably left absurd amounts to charities, or God forbid that woman. Emma stiffened. Rachel's voice came next, softer but no less calculating. She wouldn't do that. She always talked about taking care of Emma, said she owed her something. Emma's heart beat faster. Margaret had made promises before hushed assurances of gratitude, mentions of securing her future. Yet, standing here now, outside the walls of privilege, she realized how fragile those words might have been. Promises meant nothing once ink dried on paper. Inside, Gerald cleared his throat. The finalized version of the will is what matters now. And I can assure you, it reflects Margaret's true wishes. Emma swallowed hard. True wishes. Why did that sound ominous? Something had changed. She could feel it. The conversation drifted into lower tones, but Emma had heard enough. A cold unease crept over her. Had Margaret really kept her promise, or had someone ensured she wouldn't? The air in the study was thick with anticipation, laced with barely concealed greed. Emma sat toward the back of the room, fingers curled into her lap, her pulse steady but tense. The Harrington family gathered around Gerald Whitman, the family lawyer, whose crisp suit and impassive expression made him look more like an executioner than a mere reader of wills. The last testament of Margaret Harrington, Gerald announced, unfolding the document with slow precision. The room fell silent, save for the faint ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. Emma barely breathed as Gerald began reading, listing charitable donations and small bequests to distant relatives. Then came the real legacy, the division of wealth among Henry, Rachel, and Daniel Harrington. Henry leaned forward, jaw clenched. Rachel stole glances at her brother. Daniel barely moved. Gerald's voice remained steady as he recited the names, the figures, the assets. Nowhere did he say Emma Carter, not once. A slow chill crawled through Emma's spine. She swallowed, fingers twitching against her coat. The promise, the one Margaret had repeated countless times, was nowhere to be found. Was she mistaken? Had Margaret changed her mind? Or had someone made sure her name disappeared? A quiet murmur rippled through the room, barely audible, but Emma caught it the way Henry's lips curled in satisfaction, the flicker of doubt in Rachel's eyes. Her mind raced. Something was wrong, and she was going to find out why. Emma had never been one to pry. She knew when to mind her place, when silence served her better than speaking. But the missing inheritance, it was more than a disappointment. It was a puzzle, and Emma had always been too stubborn to ignore one when it presented itself. The Harrington estate's study was filled with artifacts of wealth, mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound books, glass cases displaying old relics from family travels. But Emma wasn't looking at any of those. She was focused on the cluttered drawer Gerald had rifled through earlier, where loose papers stuck out at odd angles. Her fingers brushed against aged parchment, pulling out a folded documentia creased at the edges, a previous will. Her pulse quickened. Margaret's name, clear at the top, inked with familiar precision, but as Emma's eyes scanned downward, she stopped cold. She saw her own name. Margaret had intended to leave her something. She swallowed. Why had this version been discarded? Behind her, a soft shuffle of footsteps. Emma turned, catching the sharp gaze of Rachel Harrington, arms crossed. "You shouldn't be looking at that," Rachel murmured. Emma held the paper tighter. Why wasn't this the will they read today? Rachel hesitated, then cast a glance toward the hallway where voices drifted. Someone was listening. Someone didn't want her knowing too much. Emma squared her shoulders. She wasn't about to back down now. Emma stood in the dimly lit hallway, the old will still clutched in her hand. The voices beyond the study had faded, but the weight of suspicion pressed against her chest. She wasn't just some forgotten babysitter. She had been a witnessing observer in a house filled with secrets, and someone wanted her gone. The memories crept in like whispers. Flashback 10 years ago, Emma sat beside Margaret Harrington, the late matriarch, on the veranda, the sharp scent of freshly brewed tea hanging in the humid air. "You see things others don't," Margaret had said, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "That's what makes you dangerous." Emma had laughed then, not realizing how true those words would become. She saw Henry Harrington ruthless, impatient, convinced Margaret to invest in questionable ventures that later crumbled. She heard Rachel Harrington weep behind locked doors, murmuring about the inheritance being stolen before she could even touch it. She comforted Daniel Harrington during one of his rebellious fits when he had threatened to expose the family's real estate fraud. Emma had been there for all of it, a quiet witness, a keeper of secrets too large to ignore. Back in the present, Emma stared at the old will. She had been promised a place in it perhaps, not just out of kindness, but out of necessity. Margaret had once trusted her. She had once believed Emma's silence was worth something. But someone, maybe Henry, maybe the lawyer, maybe someone she hadn't yet considered, had ensured Emma's name was erased. Now, the question wasn't just what Emma had lost. It was what she knew that made her dangerous. Emma didn't sleep that night. The weight of the discarded will pressed against her mind, each revelation layering a new level of unease. She had spent years in this house, overlooked but ever present. Now, for the first time, she felt like more than an outsider. She felt like a target. The morning was eerily quiet. The Harrington estate, usually buzzing with polite chatter, was subdued. It wasn't grief. It was something else. Emma found herself drawn back to the study. The air inside was stale, heavy with secrets still clinging to the corners. She ran her fingers along the desk, opening drawers with careful precision. Papers shuffled beneath her touch-hold contracts, deeds, notes. Then her fingers stopped. A document lay slightly out of place. The crisp edges didn't match the aged ones surrounding it. Emma pulled it free, scanning the text. Margaret Harrington's signature, dated just days before her death. But something was wrong. The ink was too fresh. The strokes of the signature off, forced. Emma frowned, flipping through more pages. Another document. A previous draft of the will. The dates didn't line up. Names had been rearranged, entire paragraphs removed. Her stomach tightened. Someone had changed the will. Someone had made sure her name disappeared. The sharp click of the door made her freeze. Rachel stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. She closed the door behind her, stepping forward with slow, deliberate movements. "You need to let this go, Emma," she murmured. Emma swallowed, feeling the weight of the warning. But she wasn't going to let it go. Not now, not when the truth was just within reach. Emma's pulse quickened as she thumbed through the papers in the study, her fingers brushing against something unusual low, delicate envelope tucked behind a stack of old ledgers. The parchment was crisp, sealed with Margaret Harrington as a familiar insignia, not meant to be found. She hesitated only for a moment before sliding her thumb beneath the seal, carefully pulling out the folded letter. The ink was faded, but unmistakable. "Emma, you have been more than an employee. You have been my greatest confidant. If anything happens to me, know that my promise remains. What I leave behind is not just for my family, it is for those who truly cared." Her breath hitched. This was proof. Margaret had intended to include her in the will, but why had she been erased? Emma read further, her eyes scanning the last lines. Margaret had mentioned a key to something locked away. A safe. A document meant for her. She swallowed hard. If this letter was hidden, then whoever altered the will had likely concealed something even more significant. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Emma stuffed the letter inside her coat, straightening just as Gerald Whitman stepped into the room. His sharp gaze flicked to her hands, looking for something. Emma forced a steady breath. He knew. Someone knew. And they were watching her every move. Emma's grip tightened around the letter hidden in her coat pocket as she stepped into the grand drawing room. The air was thick with unspoken accusations, the weight of buried truths pressing against the velvet-draped walls. She had been watched. She had been warned. But she wasn't backing down. Henry Harrington, the eldest son, stood near the fireplace, his fingers drumming against the marble mantel. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. Gerald Whitman, the lawyer, lingered nearby, sipping a dark liquid with the sort of ease only a man comfortable with deception possessed. Emma cleared her throat. "Margaret left me something. I know it. Henry scoffed, his gaze cold. You were a babysitter, Emma. Nothing more. She didn't flinch. Then why was my name in the old will? Silence. A flicker of hesitation in Henry's eyes. A shift in Gerald's posture. You should stop digging, Gerald murmured, setting his glass down with quiet finality. For your own sake? Emma took a step closer. Did you forge her signature? Henry let out a dry chuckle, but it lacked conviction. Do you have proof? And then, unexpectedly, Rachel spoke from the corner of the room. He did it. Every head turned. Emma's pulse surged. Henry stiffened. Gerald remained unnervingly calm. Rachel's voice trembled. Henry was furious when he found out what Mother planned to leave you. He made sure it wouldn't happen. Henry whirled toward his sister. Rachel, shut up. But the confession had already settled into the air, thick and undeniable. Emma exhaled slowly. It wasn't the full truth. It couldn't be. Because Henry might have orchestrated it, but someone else had helped him, and she wasn't done uncovering the real story. Emma had spent hours combing through documents, searching for a trace of what Margaret had truly intended. But everything had led her in circles until now. The Harrington estate's attic was a place of forgotten memories. Dust-coated trunks, old paintings stacked against the walls, relics of lives long gone. Nobody paid attention to what was hidden here, which was exactly why it was the perfect place to hide something. She ran her hands across a worn, leather-bound journal resting inside a locked chest. The key had been tucked in the back of Margaret's personal writing desk, a detail Emma had uncovered after carefully retracing the old woman's habits. Inside the journal, folded carefully between the brittle pages, was the real will, Margaret's unmistakable signature. The original document, untouched, unaltered, and at the bottom, Emma's name, listed among the beneficiaries. Her breath caught footsteps. The attic door creaked open, revealing Gerald Whitman, the family lawyer, the orchestrator of deception. His expression, usually calm, twisted into something dark. You weren't supposed to find that, he murmured, stepping forward. Emma's grip tightened on the will. She wasn't letting this go. Gerald lunged. The struggle was quick, but desperate hands grasping, papers scattering. Emma fought back, forcing him off balance. He wasn't expecting resistance, a sharp crash. Gerald tumbled against an old bureau, knocking over a box of forgotten heirlooms. Emma seized the moment, wrenching herself free. She bolted for the door. She had the truth now, and she was going to expose it. Emma stood at the heart of the Harrington estate, the real will clutched in her hands, the weight of truth pressing against her chest. The family was gathered tense, eyes darting between her and Gerald Whitman, the lawyer who had tried to keep her silent. The lie had unraveled. Margaret Harrington had intended to give Emma more than just money. She had entrusted her with something deeper, something dangerous. Emma had been erased not out of spite, but because she knew too much. The secret wasn't just about inheritance. It was about fraud, deception, an ugly truth buried beneath the estate's polished floors. Henry's face was rigid with anger. Rachel looked away, almost ashamed. Gerald remained perfectly still. Daniel Harrington, the grandson Emma had raised, finally spoke. This isn't just about the will, he murmured, staring directly at Emma. You know what they did, don't you? Emma met his gaze. Yes, she did. Years ago, the Harringtons had buried a financial scandal, falsifying documents, framing innocent employees, shifting blame wherever they could, all to protect their empire. Margaret had regretted it in her final years. The inheritance was meant to be an apology, but Henry couldn't let the truth surface. Now, Emma had a choice. She could expose everything, ensuring justice. Tearing down the house of deception they had built, but at great risk to herself. Or she could walk away, taking the truth with her, knowing that some secrets were more dangerous than any sum of money. Emma's fingers tightened around the will. The room waited. Her next words would decide everything.